Joining us now, Melissa Otto, Director at TIAA-CREF Investment Management. Melissa specializes in international global consumer equities and has just returned from a 4-week trip to Asia. How long did it take for you to reset your clock when you come back from a 4-week trip to Asia?
I think I'm still resetting, to be honest with you. But
You're still recovering.
Exactly.
So give me the itinerary. Where did you go in Asia to kind of scope out what's going on with the economies there?
Right. I started in Beijing and then went to Shaanxi province. I wanted to really see a second/third tier city, more in the countryside. And then after quite a few days there, came back, finished the trip in Shanghai. So total in mainland China was 2 weeks. Then from there, went to Tokyo for a week. Then after a week in Japan, went to Hong Kong for a week and did a day in Macau. And just came back.
Checking out the casinos in Macau and the shopping habits. All right, so let's start with China. I mean, as you said, you started the trip, you went to Beijing. What was it like? What's the feeling there? Is it unfettered spending? I mean, because there were times when people looked at those construction sites and said, yeah, there are a lot of sites, but there's not a lot of constructing going on because people were a little bit concerned about the government trying to rein in development.
It was very interesting. You know, I would say there's a mix happening there because on one hand, we can see, you know, quite a lot of ebullience in the malls. You know, there's traffic, there's spending, there's consumers walking around and feeling good about themselves. But then kind of go to the outskirts of the cities, and I would say the tone changes a bit. So it's hard to get a precise read on general macro. For me, the most interesting part of the trip was going outside of the big cities of Shanghai and Beijing and going to Xi'an.
Now, Xi'an, you said like a second or third tier city.
Exactly.
Only because people don't know about it, but I mean, there are a lot of people in these cities.
Indeed. And those cities are, the city that I observed was really ramping up. We're seeing a lot of store renovations, department stores going from a very old style model to a very new style model, a lot of shop-in-shops, a lot of brands coming to the city. And that's
international brands?
Exactly. So I felt that maybe is really the future story. That was my observation. It's hard to read it either way, but I found that that's maybe where the low-hanging fruit continues to be in China. It's not so much what's happening in Beijing or Shanghai. Those cities seem to me to be a bit saturated at this point. It'll be very interesting to see what the government does in terms of stimulating consumption, to see how Shanghai and Beijing can get to the next level and how these other cities can grow and develop their department store channel, can develop their actual retail channel. And there seems to be some indicators that it's moving in that direction.
Well, it certainly would be that the economy is big enough to accommodate, you know, Beijing and Shanghai, which are very internationally oriented and have a big international profile, but also this big domestic economy, which I know that we've talked about in the past, that the Chinese government has been very anxious to stimulate the growth in, as you described them, second and third tier cities outside of what many foreigners might describe as the China market. It's not just Beijing and Shanghai.
Absolutely. Many of these cities have 3 to 5 million people in them, many of them making on an average $1,000 to $3,000 US a month. And it depends how you calculate that. There's a legitimate way and there's a gray income. And, you know, just straight up salary doesn't sound like a lot, but when we incorporate the so-called gray income that's become quite a buzzword for China, it does indicate that the Chinese spending power is on the uptick. When
you looked at the domestic economy in the Shenzhen and all those types of environments, did you get the impression that they are connected to global economic growth, or is there just enough going on inside the economy to keep it rolling along?
That's a really tough question to answer. There's so many moving parts with China, and I feel like there are so many pockets of growth, there are so many trends happening, and it's a very centralized government where policy really dictates where the direction of the economy is going to go. So the question is going to be is, can the government create a scenario that stimulates consumption in a way that keeps the consumer spending? And in my view, the way that they have to do that is to create a greater safety net, because most Chinese people, even if they have cash in the bank, are hesitant to spend because they're concerned about their retirement, they're concerned about their health. And there really aren't great infrastructures for that in place outside of the major cities. So consumers still have to consider those things. And I think once the government comes in and maybe they make a greater commitment to those types of entities, then I think maybe we see the consumer getting a bit more
enthusiastic or a little bit more secure in spending their money.
Exactly right. Exactly.
All right. I mean, I got to say that, you're interested in global consumer patterns, but you're a pretty savvy global consumer shopper as well. How do you travel for a month in Asia? How do you pack or plan for a trip of that length in a place where you're going all over the map?
It's pretty funny. I actually pack very light. I only take one carry-on and just a bag. I travel very light.
That's it. 4 weeks, you're living out of the carry-on and the backpack.
I really think it comes from in my college days, backpacking around these emerging markets when they were adventure destinations. Now they're job destinations, and I think I never really became much of a big packer in terms of having the big suitcases. I think I migrated to the wheelie very naturally.
All right, so you're pulling your wheelie through Tokyo Airport. You've landed. We've got you off of out of mainland China for just a moment because you started your trip in Beijing. You ended up in Shanghai. Now you're in Tokyo. What's the sentiment like in Tokyo? They've had problems with the government. They finally put one together. Are they really going to have a stimulus plan?
It's Japan, so it's going to take a while.
Another 20 years? Do they have another 20 years to wait?
No, they don't, quite frankly. They really don't. They need to get their act together. They need to get a leader in place that's committed to good policy. They need to be focused and move things forward in terms of where the fiscal direction is going, what's happening with the yen. They need to deregulate some of their industries. There needs to be better consolidation of some of these industries. And I think they need to improve the productivity in general and create some policies that incentivize companies to do that.
Do you feel that that's going to happen? I mean, there seems to be at least some investors who've been looking at the small cap Japanese market, and they've been saying, take a look. The cash on the books of many of the companies exceeds the value of the companies when you look at their market cap in the stock market. Is there a disconnect between what goes on inside the company and what people are feeling in the stock market?
Absolutely. I think that could be said for so many companies, that they have a lot of cash, that they own terrific assets, but we just don't see the earnings momentum. And one policy I would like to see the government push forward is a better tax rate. Japan pays one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. And I think by lowering that, it does incentivize companies to improve their earnings momentum. I think that could be a positive for shareholders. But, it's anybody's best guess in terms of when and if that will ever happen. When
the headlines and the news came out that China had surpassed Japan as the world's #2 economy in terms of annual GDP, there was a response I read in the Japanese press that they were relieved that they were #3, that it was finally okay, that their ambition is not to be #2 or to continue to grow. Is there a sort of psychological lethargy that exists?
Definitely. I would say that's definitely true, but it depends on the industry. It's hard to make these blanket statements.
Like export industries focused on China, are they doing well?
Well, if we think about what Nintendo came out with last night, they delayed the launch of the 3DS and they revised down their sales and OP guidance for this year. And that's not great news.
What about Sony? Because we got Sir Howard Stringer is running Sony. I mean, he's been working on a turnaround of that company.
Sony seems to be doing a lot of the right things. It'll be interesting to see how their quarter comes out. We're excited about some of their new products as we move into the holiday season, but all eyes are on that. And it's, I have to confess that the yen is not helping any of these companies. When you're talking
much too expensive.
80 yen to the dollar, it's pretty brutal, I think, in terms of how it affects these exporters, and it makes the pricing of their products really not that competitive. The price of Nintendo's 3DS is going to be coming out at about 25,000 yen, which is, if you put that in dollar terms, almost $275 for a handheld video game machine, really targeting kids. I think that's a little pricey.
Is there a shock when you go to visit Tokyo? I mean, as you did your trip, in terms of the prices of things in Tokyo? But you're used to it, I'm sure, but...
If I convert them from
yen into dollars?
The yen price has not really changed, but if I think about it in US dollar terms, because the yen has strengthened quite a bit. I mean, I lived in Japan when it was 120, 140 yen to the dollar. So to see it at 80, 85 yen to the dollar has a bit of ouch factor.
So you don't do a lot of shopping when you're in Tokyo?
I don't.
Now, you went to Macau. You went to Macau, and did you check out the gaming operations that are there?
I did, and I have to confess, was really impressed and quite frankly blown away. One of the trends we've been looking at in Japan is the legalization of casino gaming. And we've been watching this quite closely to see if Japan opens up and could potentially become the next casino gaming destination.
Maybe take a leaf out of the book of the Chinese and their success right now in Macau. All right, I want to thank you very much. Welcome home, Melissa Otto, coming to us from TIAA-CREF, sharing your thoughts and your trip to Asia.